been no day like it before or since, when the Lord heeded the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel.
Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to your channel. This is the summary for Sabbath School Lessons 4 for the fourth quarter of the year 2025. The title of this lesson: The Conflict Behind All Conflicts. The memory text is found in Joshua 10 verse 14. There has been no day like it before or since, when the Lord heeded the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. This lesson explores one of the most challenging questions in Scripture. How can a God of love command wars and destruction, as seen in the book of Joshua? By examining the conquest of Canaan through the lens of the cosmic conflict between good and evil, we begin to understand that Israel's battles were not simply human wars but part of a much larger spiritual struggle, a reflection of the war in heaven itself. God, the initiator of the battle. The book of Joshua describes Israel's conquest as divinely directed and empowered. Over and over, Scripture declares that the Lord fought for Israel. This raises deep moral and theological questions. How can God, who is love, lead his people into violent conflict? The key to understanding lies in realizing that these wars were not acts of aggression, but part of God's redemptive plan in a cosmic battle between good and evil. God's actions aim to confront and contain the destructive power of sin, not to promote human violence. This week's lesson begins to uncover how these divine wars fit into the larger narrative of the great controversy. Sunday lesson: The commander of the Lord's army. As Joshua stood before Jericho, uncertain of how to proceed, he encountered a mysterious figure, the commander of the Lord's army. When Joshua asked whose side he was on, the answer was neither ours nor theirs, but simply no. The point was clear. The real question is not whether God is on our side, but whether we are on his. This heavenly commander was the pre-incarnate Christ, leading the armies of heaven. His appearance revealed that Israel's coming battles were part of a larger, unseen war, one not just against human enemies but against the powers of darkness. Joshua bowed in worship, acknowledging divine authority. This scene reminds believers that every earthly conflict mirrors a greater spiritual struggle, and that Christ himself leads his people into battle for righteousness and truth. Monday lesson: War in Heaven. The lesson connects the battles in Canaan to the original war in heaven, where Lucifer rebelled against God's rule. This cosmic rebellion spread to earth, and human history became a battlefield between the forces of light and darkness. The king of Babylon and king of Tyre, described by Isaiah and Ezekiel, symbolically point to Satan's pride and rebellion, not merely human rulers. The same spirit of arrogance and opposition to God that began in heaven is seen again in earthly kingdoms that resist God's purposes. Daniel 10 reveals how these fallen beings continue to oppose God's plans on earth. Thus, the wars in Israel's history are manifestations of the greater cosmic controversy. Every clash in Canaan was not merely about territory but about truth, worship, and allegiance. God's actions were aimed at restoring justice, revealing his character, and restraining evil's advance in the world. Tuesday lesson: The Lord is a warrior. The Bible boldly declares, "The Lord is a warrior, the Lord is his name." This title may surprise us, but it emphasizes God's role as the defender of his people and the destroyer of evil. When Israel groaned under Egyptian oppression, God rose to deliver them, not only from Pharaoh's power but from the demonic forces behind Egypt's false gods. God's warfare is never about cruelty or domination. It's about justice, deliverance, and the defeat of sin. Every act of divine judgment, from Egypt to Canaan, is part of his ongoing fight against evil, culminating at the cross, where Christ triumphed over all powers and principalities. The destruction of Canaan's corrupt societies must therefore be seen within this biblical worldview. These nations had fully aligned themselves with evil, becoming instruments of demonic opposition to God's plan of salvation. Their removal symbolized the final judgment that will one day eradicate all sin. In this great conflict, no one can remain neutral. We are either on God's side or against him. Wednesday lesson: The Lord will fight for you. At the Red Sea, surrounded by mountains and an advancing army, Israel faced an impossible situation. Yet Moses declared, "The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." This moment revealed God's original intent for his people. They were not meant to conquer through warfare, but through faith and obedience. God himself desired to be their defender, fighting their battles while they trusted in his power. Sadly, unbelief and murmuring later caused Israel to lose this privilege, leading them into direct conflict with their enemies. Ellen G. White explains that if Israel had remained faithful, they would have inherited the land without lifting a weapon. Their disobedience forced God to work through a second-best plan, one that still revealed his power but required their participation in battle. Even today, murmuring and doubt weaken our ability to experience God's victories. When we stop trusting him, we end up fighting battles he never meant us to fight. Thursday lesson. The second-best option. Israel's first battle after the Exodus, against the Amalekites, arose because of their unbelief and complaints. God allowed this attack so they might learn to trust in him again. While God's ideal was to deliver them without warfare, he adapted his plan to meet their spiritual condition. This flexibility shows God's patience and grace. He doesn't abandon his people when their faith falters. Instead, he meets them where they are and continues to teach them dependence on him. At Jericho, Israel again saw that victory depended entirely on obedience and faith. They did not fight through human strength but through divine power. The walls fell by God's command. Yet they still had to act in faith, marching and shouting as instructed. Their participation was symbolic. God fought, but his people cooperated. The lesson is timeless. Faith and obedience always go hand in hand. Even when God adjusts his methods, his ultimate goal remains the same: to develop in his people complete trust in his leadership. Friday lesson. Further thought. Behind every battle in Scripture lies a spiritual reality, the ongoing war between the Creator and the rebel. When Satan challenged God's authority, the Lord could either surrender his rule or uphold his justice. Love demanded that he act. Thus, the image of God as a warrior reflects his commitment to truth, justice, and the protection of his creation. The wars in Israel's history prefigured the final victory of Christ at the end of time, when evil will be fully defeated. God's actions in Canaan were not random acts of wrath but reflections of his larger mission to cleanse the universe of sin and restore eternal peace. Ellen G. White reminds us that Israel's wars were never God's first plan. It was not his purpose that they should gain the land by warfare, but by strict obedience to his commands. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 392. The true conflict is spiritual. Every earthly struggle reflects the ongoing cosmic battle between God and Satan. God's justice is rooted in love. His acts of judgment are never arbitrary but aimed at saving and protecting creation from evil. Trust replaces striving. When we stand still in faith, God fights for us, spiritually, emotionally, and physically. Faith and obedience are our weapons. Victory comes through surrender, not strength. God meets us where we are. Even when we falter, he adapts his guidance to lead us back into alignment with his will. In conclusion, the conflict behind all conflicts reminds us that what happened on the plains of Canaan was not just ancient warfare. It was part of a cosmic drama still unfolding today. Every believer stands at the front lines of this great controversy, called to choose a side. But the victory is already assured, for the commander of the Lord's army, Jesus Christ himself, fights for his people. When we trust, obey, and stay close to him, the walls of our own Jerichos will fall, and his triumph will become ours. God bless you.
There has been no day like it before or since, when the Lord heeded the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. There has been no day like it before or since, when the Lord heeded the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. Joshua 10:14.